Does it work on PS5? Does it work on Xbox Series X? A question I get asked quite too often on the channel, but I do understand people's frustrations. Now, in this video, I'm going to be explaining the refresh rates and resolutions that you can achieve if you have a console. Now, before proceeding with this video, if you do appreciate the content that you're going to see, definitely do consider subscribing and, of course, hitting that bell notification. It'd be greatly appreciated. So to kick things off, I do have to make a little disclaimer. At the time of making this video, all the information that I'm going to be sharing with you is factually correct. If, of course, that changes later down the line via firmware updates, I will make a note on the description below or in the comments section below, but that is completely out of my control because I don't work for Microsoft or Sony. So with that out of the way, let's get on to refresh rates. Now, there's a few common refresh rates on the monitor market: 60 Hz, 75 Hz, 144 Hz, and above. So 240 Hz, 360, and all that shebang. Now, if you are a console gamer only and you do not play on PC, there is absolutely no point in getting a monitor that has over 120 Hz. And you might be thinking, well, wait a second, you didn't mention 120 Hz in your list of refresh rates. Well, absolutely. There is only a very finite number of monitors that have up to 120 Hz only. In other words, 120 Hz monitors. There are a few out there, but quite frankly, a lot of them go to 144 Hz. So really, for the argument's sake, and if you're looking for a PC monitor but going to be using it for console only, you're going to be looking up to 144 Hz only. The only exception to this is if you are a PC gamer and a hardcore PC gamer, like a competitive hardcore CSGO gamer like myself, and you also game on console, let's say casually because you're playing FIFA or something like that, then absolutely, fair enough. Get yourself a high refresh rate monitor, but just remember that your consoles will not output anything more than 120 Hz. But what about the resolution? Well, here both consoles support up to 4K at 120 Hz. The issue, however, is that at 4K at 120 Hz, you have a lot of bandwidth. In other words, a lot of information that's going between your console and your monitor. And for this, you need the right standard. By standard, I mean the connection. Here you need HDMI 2.1. So you might be thinking, well, my console has HDMI 2.1, I've got an HDMI 2.1 certified cable, so therefore my monitor will automatically do it, or should do 4K 120 Hz, if the monitor is a 4K 144 or 120 Hz monitor. Well, no. Your monitor also has to have the right input, the right connection. In other words, if your monitor does not have HDMI 2.1, you can't utilize 4K at 120 Hz. And even the police officers or ambulances will agree with that. Maybe you can pick that up in the background. But what I'm trying to say over here is the fact that you cannot utilize the maximum refresh rate and resolution unless you have got a very modern monitor. Now, HDMI 2.1 monitors at the time of filming do exist. They're a few and far between, but they're also pretty spenny because they're offering quite a unique selling point. They're HDMI 2.1 monitors and therefore will appeal to console gamers, so you might have to pay a little bit of an extra premium for that privilege. If, however, you're going to be looking for other monitors out there on the market where they're limited to HDMI 2.0, here you're limited to 4K at 60 Hz. Now, to make things even clearer, let's break it down per resolution. So another little bit of a disclaimer, anything that I mention over here, say for example HDMI 1.4, means that if you've got an HDMI 2.0 port, it is backwards compatible. Not upwards compatible, but backwards. So therefore, let's take an example. Let's start off with 1080p resolution at 60 Hz. Here you need only HDMI 1.0. Quite frankly, I can't remember the last time I saw HDMI 1.0 in terms of a standard. But here, if you've got HDMI 1.4, 1.2, 2.0, 2.1, all of them will support 1080p at 60 Hz. Now next up, we've got 1080p at 120 Hz. Here you need HDMI 1.4 or above, which is of course very common with a lot of 1080p 144Hz panels. Next up we get to 1440p, and here you have got HDMI 1.4 in order to output 1440p at 60 Hz, and then you will need HDMI 2.0 if you so wish to have 1440p at 120 Hz. And finally move up to 4K. Here if you've got HDMI 2.0 you can output 4K at 60 Hz. If however you want that fabled 4K at 120 Hz, you're going to need HDMI 2.1. So with the refresh rates and the resolutions out of the way, there's another thing that you should consider. Which console do you actually have? Now if you have an Xbox Series X, here the Xbox natively supports 1080p, 1440p and 4K at all the resolutions. In other words, 120Hz and 60Hz, obviously with the appropriate connections that we just referenced. It also has VRR support, again, natively via AMD FreeSync. So therefore, if your monitor has AMD FreeSync support, you can benefit from VRR and therefore have a tear-free gaming experience at pretty much all the resolutions if you are bearing in mind with the right connections. Now as for Sony, the PS5 is a little bit more complicated. It supports 1080p and 4K only. It does not natively support 1440p. So as a result, if you want 1440p, you need to find a monitor that supports a 4K input. That means that it doesn't have to actually have a 4K resolution, just support the 4K signal. Take for example, you've got a 1440p monitor that runs at 144Hz, so therefore can run at 120Hz on the Xbox, but you're a PlayStation gamer. If the monitor supports a 4K input, the monitor will downscale that 4K image and bring it down to 1440p. If the monitor does not support the 4K input, your monitor will output 1080p instead, even though it's a 1440p monitor on your PS5. Because again, the PS5 does not natively support 1440p at the time of making this video. So how do you find out if the monitor has 4K input? Well, you're going to have to look through the marketing claims of the manufacturers or the specs, look at reviews such as ones from myself where I'll be testing for 4K input or at least commenting on it in certain domains, and here as a result it will give you an indication if it will work with your PlayStation 5 at 1440p. Again, this really affects 1440p monitors only, because if you've got a 4K monitor and or a 1080p monitor, they'll be natively running at their own resolutions via your PS5, and therefore don't have to do any upscaling, downscaling technology to get to 1440p. And there we have it. Hopefully now you've been a little bit more informed as to knowing if this monitor would work on a PS5 or Xbox Series X. The running joke that keeps on giving, of course. Now, if you feel that this video has been helpful, drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification. If you feel that this video will be helpful to a family and friend or relative making that informed purchasing decision, definitely do share it with them, as it might give them a little bit more of an indication as to if their monitor they've been looking at will actually work at their desired resolution and refresh rate. Alright, I've been Totally Dubbed, take care of yourselves, and goodbye.